Okay. Okay, welcome back. Welcome back to the fifth out of six installments in our series of great Jewish books and thinkers. And tonight we are covering a very multifaceted, very innovative, very revolutionary Jewish Torah giant. I've started each class by saying that it's up to me. It's called Great Jewish Books and Thinkers. So do I focus on the thinker or the book? So in our case tonight, when we talk about Rabbi Yisroel Salanter, we're forced really to talk about the person and the revolution that he started in the world, which is still fairly influential today, because we don't have too much of his writings at all. The only writings we have is this small volume. To be accurate, it's really half of this volume. The other half of it is different writings of a student of his. And really all it is a collection of letters that he wrote to his students. He had very successful students in the world of Musar, in the yeshiva world in the 1800s, and they were published after he died. So in his lifetime, he published nothing. And he didn't, even after his lifetime, it was just a collection of his letters that he wrote to students that were published under the title of Or Yisroel. The individual who published these writings, his name is Rav Itzla of Petalburg. He was one of the great students of Rabbi Yisroel Salanter, and that's all the writings we have. So tonight will be, I think, very interesting. We'll get a sense of the challenges that Rabbi Yisroel Salanter was living in his times and how he thought through this revolution to combat and to really be the antidote of the challenge of his time. But in doing so, I'm going to share many extremely powerful and telling vignettes and stories and anecdotes about his lifetime, because they are really what speak the loudest volume of who he was as a person and what he tried and to some extent successfully inculcated in the world. One more thing that I'll say is many of the stories that I'm sharing, it comes from one of the most wonderful books ever published in recent history, called The Making of a Gadol. The Making of a Gadol was written by my Rebbe's father, so a Rebbe of mine. His name is Rav Yosef Kamenetsky, nephew of the famous Rosh Yeshiva, current Rosh Yeshiva in Philadelphia, Rav Shmuel Kamenetsky. And Rav Nassim, my Rebbe's father, Rav Nassim Kamenetsky, so Rav Shmuel Kamenetsky's late brother, he passed away maybe about 4 years ago. So he started to write a book about his late father, so my Rebbe's grandfather, Rav Yaakov Kamenetsky, and he realized he was being very academic about it, and he ended up collecting this unbelievable collection of stories and facts about just the world of European yeshivas. So what he did is he took all the specific interviews and papers and research about his late father, Rav Yaakov Kamenetsky, and he pushed that towards Rav Yonasan Rosenblum, who is an author today, and he wrote the book about my Rebbe's grandfather. And what Rav Nassim Kamenetsky ended up published was just this magnum opus on what yeshiva life was like during this time that we're about to discuss tonight and beyond. So there's a great section of that book is dedicated to the life and legacy of Rabbi Yisroel Salanter. So a lot of these stories are taken from there. Okay. Yisroel Lipkin, aka Rabbi Yisroel Salant. He spent much of his years in Salant, as we will go through. He was born and raised in a tiny little shtetl called Zeiger, which was like a little shtetl outside of Kovna. He would later spend some years back in Kovna. We'll go through what sent him back to Kovna. His father was a major Rav. His father became the Rav of Telz, which was one of the big positions held in the day. But that is the home that Rabbi Yisroel Salanter grew up in. If there was one characteristic as a person that right away comes to mind, before we get to how he dedicated his life and what he did, there's one thing about him which is very clear, is he was an absolute raving genius. He was known to be the Gadol Hador for many decades, the greatest Torah scholar of his generation. Maybe a genius is not so rare, but he used his intense acumen and his intense knowledge of Shas and Poskim, all the Gemara, all the sources, to really be very countercultural in a very deep way, as we will explain. Just a couple anecdotes about his genius. As we'll go through, his major revolution in the world was called the Musar movement. But we're going to pocket that for a little bit later on. But if we could just peer forward for a moment, there was a lot of resistance that was held to accepting this Musar movement, and we'll explain what that means in a second. But think yeshiva world, and the first thing that comes to your mind is probably not flexibility to new ideas, right? It's not the greatest strength of the yeshiva world. So this was a massively new idea, and there's a lot of pushback. And when he went town to town to promote his Musar movement, the learning of Musar and to teach people how to learn Musar, etc., he would go give a class just about Talmudic, delve into some esoteric Talmudic idea. And the last 15 minutes, he would talk about Musar because no one was willing to give him the microphone, so to speak, just to talk about Musar because no one cared about it. So the way this worked for all traveling Torah scholars is there would be some communication, and he would send a letter of 15 to 20 Talmudic sources, Tosfos here, the Gemara there, the Rashba over there, and they would hang up the sign of sources for a week or two in advance. The community would prepare, and then this great Torah scholar would come in and give a class on this, on the sources that were sent out. Okay, but people really wanted to embarrass Rav Yisroel Salanter, make him look bad. So the day before he came, some nunnik, right, took down the paper that the Gabbai sent up and posted completely new sources. It was actually not even the day before, it was like the week before. So the community was learning these sources, 15 to 20 sources that some person randomly put together in preparation for Yisroel Salanter's to come to give a class, a shir klali, so to speak, on these sources. And the shtetl was completely puzzled because these sources had nothing to do with each other. Tosfos here, they had no connection, right? 15 to 20 sources. So now, think of yourself as Yisroel Salanter walking into this town, shtetl, to give this year. He walks in, they greet him with a lot of kavod, obviously, and they bring him into the shul, and he looks at the sources, and he realizes, number one, they're not what he sent in. So what does he do? Does he give the class that he prepared, which makes him look bad because the community had been preparing a bunch of other sources? Is he going to call them out and embarrass someone, which was something which he would never do? So what does he do? He looks through the sources, and on his way to the pulpit, to the bima, he's thinking intensely, and then he dazzles the community with a perfect class of these random sources, ties them all together somehow, and he blew everyone away. No one knew it except for a student who was there, who ended up, sharing the story with the world. So it's a magnificent story to understand how impossible that is to do, but he did it. So this just shows you the raving genius that he was. There's later in life, he's probably the only person we could ever say this about. He started smoking by doctor's order for his health. Now back then, he was born in 1810, died in 1883. It was definitely not known that it was a health concern, so I say that tongue in cheek. But he was one time walking in the street and he collapsed. He had a stroke. Whatever physician he saw at the time, whether this fits with modern day knowledge of science and medicine, but he was told that the reason why he had a stroke is because he was so intense in his thought all day and really all night. He'd wake up in the middle of the night and write and think, and his brain was just on overload. So it got overloaded and he had a stroke. That's what he was told. So the doctor told him he has to at least have 2 hours every day that he's not in deep thought. So that's when he took up smoking to help him relax and distract him, and he would go out on walks and smoke for 2 hours every day. He would take his mind off of his intense thoughts, okay? Lastly, as an anecdote to show his intense genius, these stories are so beyond our ability to really comprehend what they really mean. But at the age of 14, first of all, that's the year he got married, which back then wasn't a crazy thing, but we live in a different world. At the age of 14, at the end of his Shava Brachos, so at the first year, he sent a kuntras, like a sefer that he wrote. We don't have a copy of this, to Rabbi Kiva Eger. Rabbi Kiva Eger, when Yisroel Salanter was a little boy, was the Gadol Hador, the greatest Talmudic mind of the generation by far. And he asked, what do you think of this? And Rabbi Kiva Eger never responded. But later on, a student of Rabbi Yisroel Salanter or a Rav from the same city from Zyger that Rav Salanter grew up in. He was visiting Rabbi Akiva Eger, and he says, "Oh, you're from that town? There's a boy there, a 14-year-old, who sent me his Talmudic discourse in writing, and he called it like Gaonis Atzuma, like astonishing genius. Like he was blown away. Rabbi Akiva Eger was blown away by the writings of this 14-year-old boy." So this is just to show kind of what kind of person he was naturally. This is not really a compliment to him yet. As I recollect sometimes, I once asked my Rebbe of Usher Weiss for advice how to get to his level of Torah mastery. Now, my Rebbe of Usher Weiss could rattle off the entire Shas Bavli, Yerushalmi, Tosfos, Arba Chalkei, Shulchan Aruch, and Rambam word for word, like without missing a beat. So, like, obviously, I wasn't being realistic. I know my own thresholds, but I said, like, what's a trick that I could do to help me get closer to where you are? And he took a deep breath and he says, they don't like teaching you this in yeshiva, but really the secret to my success, he says, is natural gifts that God bestowed upon me. Right. So in other words, up till now we haven't really complimented the person of Rabbi Salanter because that was a gift of God. That he was a genius, a 14-year-old Eloi, and someone who was able to prepare those sources last minute. But what really should impress us much more than natural acumen is dedicating your life to a mission and making a positive difference with whatever God gives you into the world, which he did with flying colors. As a teenager, he discovered a hidden tzaddik. The big tzaddikim used to do this sometimes, where they would kind of masquerade themselves as a simple Jew. It seemed to be like very big spiritual heights to not get attention. Okay, so in Salant, at the time his family moved to Salant, as an older teenager, he had noticed a water carrier by the name of Zundel. Okay, later we know him as Rav Zundel of Salant, known as Rav Yisroel Salanter's Rebbe. That's the only thing you'll ever see of his brought down or written, that he was just the Rebbe, the mentor of Rav Yisroel of Salanter, Rav Zundel of Salant. And he noticed just in his character, the way he treated people, Rabbi Yisroel noticed in this water carrier that this was a holy, holy man. So he would just follow him from place to place and kind of scooch behind him. And one day he was walking to the forest for some time by himself, and Rabbi Yisroel Salanter was trying to kind of hide and make sure Rav Zundel didn't see him, and he cracked a stick, and that showed where that he was following Rav Zundel. And Rav Zundel Salanter just looked behind him, and he said, "Just study Musar, and you'll become a Yirei Shamayim. Just learn Musar, and you'll become someone who fears heaven, who fears God." And Rav Yisroel Salanter would later say that was the moment that changed his life. That was the moment that he realized what he needed to do and what the generation needed given the challenges of his time. And we'll get into the challenges of the time right now, and how Musar, what Musar is, and how he felt that could change the world. So he spent first. So from Salant he moved to Vilna. Vilna was the capital of Torah in Lithuania. It was everything. Vilna was the hub of Judaism in Lithuania. So he went to there, and he was already seen to be a young but tremendous Torah scholar. So there was a very famous yeshiva there called Ramailis, and he became not the Rosh Yeshiva. There was a Rosh Yeshiva already, but he became what's called a Magid Shir. He would give a daily class at this major yeshiva in Vilna. I mean, you can't get much better than that for the age that he's at. We're talking, he's 18, he's 19, he's 20. He's a young man, and he's now giving a daily shir at one of the great yeshivas in Lithuania. Fine. In Vilna, nonetheless. But after a couple of years, what happened is everyone, all the boys, were flocking to him because he had charisma. His every class he gave was dazzling. And Rabbi Yisroel Salanter felt that he was taking away from the Rosh Yeshiva's draw and magneticism. Nothing was said to him about it, but he felt that was the case. So he left. He left the yeshiva, and then he started his own yeshiva in Vilna. And that took off in its own way. But again, that shows very early on his sensitivity to other people, which would end up being a major hallmark in how he treated people, as we will delve into. Okay, so as he was there, He had a local role. He was a Rosh Yeshiva. There's about 150 boys in his yeshiva. His yeshiva was revolutionary in that back then, a yeshiva boy, where did he eat? Do you know how a yeshiva bacher ate? There would be a schedule, but they would go around to people's homes. And there would be like a shift, like these 4 boys would stick together, and then it'd be the Saxner home, and then you go around to the brats and then to the Aspers, and they would cycle around to different homes, which was nice, but you could understand that if you wanted to uplift a person, you kind of feel like you're always taking from someone else. So he was the first yeshiva ever who fed the boys in-house. So he raised extra money, and he fed the boys. He very much wanted the boys to feel like they were a prince, they were majesty. You were the ones who get to learn Torah, not you're learning Torah, so you have to schnorr here and schnorr there. He wanted it to be something which had a certain splendor to it. He was very makbid, he was very careful that the boys were dressed very well. Yisroel Salanter never in his whole life had 2 dimes to rub together. But you looked at him, and he was wearing, he looked like a king. He looked like a king with his suit, completely neat. And that's what he expected of his boys. So in that way, it was very revolutionary. At that time, while he was there in Vilna, at the same time, in a town in Germany called Brunswick, the Jewish community there formally adopted the ways of Reform Judaism, which wasn't rare. Reform Judaism and the Haskalah movement was raging through Lithuania at the time, they threw away the Shulchan Aruch, and they made a rule at this rabbinical conference that intermarriage is okay, it's kosher, as long as she came from a monotheistic religion. So that was like a little halachic twist on intermarriage. And he made a very tragic prediction at that time. And he said, in Germany, they're doing away with the Shulchan Aruch. One day, the non-Jews will force the Shulchan Aruch upon them, upon us. Okay? 91 years later, Germany adopted the Nuremberg laws, and in there was that it was prohibited, it was illegal for an Aryan race to have any relationship, intimate or marriage, with a Jew. Right? So the Jews of Germany, he saw almost a century before this all took place in Germany, he saw that they were allowing intermarriage to take place, and he says the non-Jews will force us back into the world of the Shulchan Aruch. Right? That's what he said almost a century before it happened. So he had that sensitivity as well, which that reality was indicative of the major struggle at the time. It was a dire time for Torah Judaism. What you basically had is shtetls and the big cities. The shtetlach were very insular communities, and you basically had 2 types of Jewish influencers, for lack of a better term, in the shtetlach. You had the great Torah scholars who were very rigid, who were very Talmudic. There was no one inspiring you from their perspective. You had a shaila about your chicken, you had a shaila about Shabbos, you had a shaila in Bezdin. They will answer you in a brilliant manner. But there was no one inspiring the Jewish people to living a passionate life, aside from the other half of the Jewish influence world. Right? So you had the Rabbanim, I just described, and you had also very common in that time, the Magidim, right? The Magid. They would travel from town to town, and they would tell stories. They would make you laugh. Everyone had their own style. Some were more witty, some were more humorous, and their goal was essentially to give you a drasha on Shabbos, to make you laugh, to give you a little takeout, to inspire you. The issue was that they were not, their focus and their only people that they were really hitting were the laymen. But if a kid left the small city, left the shtetl to go to the big city, and went to university, and were exposed to larger ideas about the world and about philosophy and ideas which were compelling, they would laugh at the Maggid. The Maggid was like, he wasn't someone that even in the shtetl world was really respected. Oh, the Maggid's coming, you stand out. No, the Maggid's coming. Okay, he's going to make us laugh. He's going to maybe give us a little vart. But they weren't individuals. They weren't characters that were highly respected in society. And therefore, when the Haskalah movement came around, representing the rabbinic allure for the Reform movement, they would dance around Tanakh, They would take Gemaras and re-understand them based on stories in Tanakh, and they would dazzle the minds of these young Jews, and they would get drawn in to leave Torah Judaism because there was nothing in Torah Judaism which was engaging for the mind, for the intellectual mind like that, aside from your very rigid Rav who knew halacha and knew Talmudic literature really well, but wasn't doing really any effort to communicate that in an inspiring way to the community. So the makeup of Jewish communities then was really prime and right for the Haskalah movement to really do what it did. In comes the Rabbi Yisroel Salanter's innovation and what he felt was the real true antidote to the problem of the Haskalah movement, which was the Musar movement. The Musar movement, it's a little tricky to define what Musar is and what the Musar movement focused on. The best way I could do it is that, and I'll read you a line from one of the letters here as well to back up this definition. But it enables the Torah that someone learns to affect the person, okay? To change and improve towards a more ethical iteration of yourself. The Mishnah in Pirkei Avos says that Torah is a hechsher to become a better person. A hechsher means it could prime you to be a better person, but it doesn't make you a better person unless it's coupled with the thought and the learning of Musar. So Musar takes Torah and applies it to yourself, to your psyche, to your midos, to your characteristics. If you just learn Torah and you don't apply the Musar strategy to it, then you'll become very knowledgeable about Torah law, but that won't saturate your being to uplift you to a more kind, compassionate, altruistic, giving, patient, etc. person, right? That it won't do unless you do Musar to it. Musar is, by the way, I want to read you this line. It's a very powerful, very beautiful line. I'll translate it. It says, transforming a person from bad to good without Musar, Rabbi Yisroel Salanter writes to a student, is like attempting to see without an eye or to hear without an ear. Right? Musar unlocks the power of Torah to change a person. Right? So Musar was not invented by Rabbi Yisroel Salanter. Musar, we have classic Musar Sfarim like the Mesilas Yesharim, that was written by Rav Moshe Chaim Luzzatto and others as well. Those were written in the 1700s, so well before, about 100 years before this all happened. And those earlier works became almost the textbooks to the Musar movement. But what Rav Yisroel Salanter did do, is he formalized a methodology how to take these textbooks and use them so they could actually change you as a person. For example, he innovated something called the Beis HaMusar, right? The Beis HaMusar, which is, there's back in the day, even today we have this, we have something called the Yeshiva, which is where you go to learn Torah. You have something called a Beit Knesset, or a Shul, which you go to daven, huh? Yeah, nice try, Hadi. Right? Now it's a little ambiguous nowadays because in Yeshiva they daven, and in Shuls they learn, right? But it used to be in Talmudic times, they would literally leave the Beit Midrash to go daven and then come back to learn. It was two separate halls, study hall and the prayer hall. So Rabbi Yisroel Salanter invented a third brick and mortar, which was a Beis HaMusar. A Beis HaMusar was a small little house, he envisioned it in every shtetl, small little house with the lights dimmed. The only books you could find there are Musar books, right? So you're not going to find a set of Gemara in there, right there. You're going to find just the Musar works. And it was meant to learn on your own, so you come by yourself. The lights were dimmed, and you'd open up one of the classic works of Musar, you would sing it to yourself. And when you got to a line that was moving to you, you would say it again and again for 30 minutes, for 40 minutes, just saying that line. It was, how he describes it, it was very much like a meditation. But it's meditation, instead of a mantra, it's words of Chazal, words from the Gemara, words from a classic Musar work that you would repeat to yourself in a tune, in an endearing tune, again and again, until you would have hitpilus, like you would be moved by it, and doing that on a daily basis. He said the Torah is going to seep into you, and you're going to be thinking about not just the law, but the but the characteristics that are behind the law as well. He would have a lot of aphorisms or sayings that became very famous and became very much a part of the Mussar world, which is fairly alive today in the world of yeshivas. Every classic yeshiva, there's no separate room for learning Mussar, but there's called a Mussar Seder every day, where every day in a yeshiva, those 15 minutes, 20 minutes, that's a dedicated time to take out one of the classic Mussar works of Mussar, one of the works of Yisroel Salanter students, or the Mesilas Yesharim, the Chovas Halavavos, right? All these, the classic Mussar Sfarim you could take out for these 20 minutes a day and try in modern iteration to replicate the vision that Rav Yisroel Salanter had. So one of the famous aphorisms that he had, which is a very powerful one to think of, and he lived by it very much. He was someone who very much avoided the enjoyment of this world. He was not classic Jewish philosophy in that, but he very much pushed away anything in this world. This is not what I was going to share now, but something just popped in my head, which is an amazing story. As we mentioned, he was a smoker, right? So he woke up in the middle of the night as an adult, and he had a huge craving for a cigarette. Okay, I don't know what that means, but I would say tell me after, but I don't think you know what that means either. So he woke up and he really wanted a cigarette, right? He was addicted, and he really wanted a cigarette. The problem was he didn't have any, and the only shop that would sell them at that time of night, whatever it was like, who knows, a half a mile away. It's a dead 15-minute walk. So here he is in bed, analyzing his own thought process, which is a hallmark in the Mussar movement, to look at, we have a thought nowadays and we just choose something and we do it. But a Baal Mussar, right, an individual who's been influenced deeply by this train of thought, you don't just make a decision. And if you analyze what inner characteristic is making me want to do this decision, and then you'll fight with yourself. Is that the right one? Maybe I should do something else. And then you'll analyze what's motivating you to do that. And you'll try to make choices which stamp out, albeit ever so slightly, negative character traits, and you want to reinforce positive character traits. And if you do that every day, 7-10 times a day, you'll end up refining yourself. That's one of the core characteristics of a Baal Mussar, someone who's been affected by this train of thought. So here he is in bed. He wants a cigarette. He knows he doesn't have them. He knows it's a 15-minute walk. So he starts thinking to himself, okay, I'll just stay sleeping. It's fine, right? He said, wait a second. What's motivating me to stay asleep? Perhaps it's laziness. Laziness is crude. It's a horrible midah characteristic in his world. That was something that you had to get rid of completely. Thou shalt not be lazy, right? Okay, so I should go get it. I should go get a cigarette if I don't want to be lazy. Well, hold on. If I go get the cigarette, so maybe that's ta'ava. Maybe that's indulgence. I'm taking something from this world just because I have a taiva, a craving. Well, I don't need it now. I just want it now. So here he is stuck, I would say, between a pillow and a sheet, but between a rock and a hard place. And he didn't know what to do. No matter what he did, is going to be an expression of a negative characteristic. If he doesn't get the cigarette, he might be just being lazy. If he gets a cigarette, he's cashing in on his own worldly pleasures, which we didn't want to do. So he invented a third option. He got up, he went to the store, and he didn't buy the cigarette. And then he just walked back. Unbelievable, huh? So by getting up, he's ever so slightly pushing away the midah of laziness, and he got there, and he just said hi to the clerk, and then left. He's forcing himself not to give in to that worldly pleasure, right? So he got to have his cake and eat it too, but he didn't get to have his cake and didn't get to eat it, right? So it's the exact opposite. But that's like an unbelievable story that really shows we're not used to relating to our inner choices with such depth and analysis. But that's exactly what he did. That's what he wrote about. He writes about something called, or really students express it this way, nituach hama'asim, which is like comparing decisions you make in different scenarios. Someone could think that he's a very generous person. He gives away a ton of money, right? But then the Mussar movement would force that person to go in a dark room and think about it. And then if you realize, wait a second, I only give money to during opportunities that gets my name on the building, in an extreme expression. Or I only give money if I can get a tax receipt out of it, right? So then maybe, not always, it's a risky, we don't speak in absolutes, but maybe you're not really generous, you just love your name on buildings, or you love tax receipts, right? Or something along those lines. So it forces you to take an outward expression of giving. What's giving? It's generosity. You're giving away money. That's generosity. That's kindness. That's altruism. And the Muslim movement, for good and for bad, will say, not so fast. Maybe something you're doing, which on an outward expression is bad, but maybe that's actually good if you analyze it. Maybe something that you're doing and a superficial expression looks really amazing, but maybe there's improvements to be made, right? And it forces you to understand the inner workings of the outward decisions that we make. So he had one of the analogies that were very, very definitive in the Muslim movement is you would compare this world, right? Those stories were all by way of introduction. He wasn't someone who engaged in the pleasures of this world all that much at all. So he would compare this world to an expensive hotel room. You go to an expensive hotel room, obviously you can give all these examples, but nice hotel room, it's got a little fridge with these fancy bottles of booze, and you're living like a king, like a queen, everything's for free, you paid for the room already, so you open the bottles of booze, there's a menu, you order up food, 10 minutes later it shows up at your door, there's movies to watch, you click a few movies, and you have a grand old time, and you check out a few days later, and the person gives you the bill, and there's all these extra charges on the room. It's like, what are these charges? Oh, you took this, you took that. He says, that's what this world is like. You don't pay up front. You're in this world and you enjoy this, you enjoy that. Everything at the end, at 120, there's going to be a long bill. If you enjoyed this, you enjoyed that, pay up. Right? Which is a scary analogy. But he says, accept. Accept for a huge exception. Which is, if you're an ambassador representing a country and you're traveling, or if you work for a company and they're sending you overseas to meet and connect with business connections and whatnot, go to conferences. So then, when you go to the hotel, you swipe the company card. If you need a car while you're there, you put it on the company card. Your planes are paid by the company. So he says, if a Jew feels or can live the life where he is the ambassador of God, ambassador of Hashem, that everything he's taking for this world, look, I want to inspire others, so I need to eat. Put it on the company card. I need to replenish myself so I could daven, so I could learn, so I could do more chesed, kindness. Put it on the company card, the $10,000 vacation to Honolulu, to come back replenished so you can continue giving. Put it on the company card. And he says that is the way out to enjoy this world and not have it cost you at the end of times, is to work with the partnership of the Ribono Shel Olam, a partnership of the world. Fine. There's a story which gets into a different struggle of his time, which also reveals this, one thing that really drove him berserk, and the only times that there's any stories of him losing his anger was when he saw a dissonance between the way someone's acting on the outside, acting all righteous, all good, but on the inside was rotten. And he could see it in other people because he was an expert at analyzing actions and decisions. So one of the very dark chapters of Jewish history, while he was there, for a handful of decades, there was a Cantonist Gzeira, the Tsar Nicholas in Russia at the time, would force every shtetl to send a certain amount of children to his army. Right? Army service was from 15 to 40. So if your kid was sent to Tsar Nicholas's army, the family wouldn't see that kid until he was his 40s. The chances of him knowing anything about Yiddishkeit is slim to none. It was basically saying goodbye to your child. And the darkest point, the darkest element of this, the hardest point, is that it would pin Jew against Jew. Because again, the way Tsar Nicholas, in his cruel manner, set it up, is every shtetl needed to supply a certain amount of children, but it was the shtetl's choice which children they would send. So who was chosen? Often families of poor Nebuch families. So the hierarchy, the totem pole of social hierarchy, which we pretend doesn't exist, which was thrown to the forefront. Okay, and there was this while he was. This all started in 1827 and lasted for more than 30 years. In Salant at the time, they needed to produce these soldiers. There was a woman who her panasa is she was playing instruments, and her son would dance with her and collect the money, and that was her panasa. She would kind of travel through. So the Rabbanim of Salant figured out that they could just register her to Salant, take that kid, and then it would be one less that we have to worry about in Salant. Like one less of ours, like this Nebuch lady's traveling, and she's here now, we'll register her to Salant and we'll take her kid. Okay. He wasn't living in Salant at the time, but he was traveling through for Shabbos. And this lady and her child was being held, it's crazy, by the community until Tsar Nicholas was coming to collect the children, and she was left without her child. So she heard that the great Rav Yisroel Salanter was coming, so she tried to get her ears in edgewise to see if he could help her with the situation. And she came in, it was Shabbos morning, and on the way to shul or something like that, and she just lost it to Rav Yisroel Salanter and started crying and told him the whole story. And he just said right away, he heard the story, he says, don't worry, after Shabbos it'll be fine. She was relieved, she had no clue what he meant. Fine. At shul, later on that day, they made Kiddush. They were mechabed him to make Kiddush. All the Rabbanim of the city were there, because the great Rav Yisroel Salanter was in town. And after Kiddush, he took a sip of the grape juice, had a little mazonos, and he lost it every Rav that was there, every Rav of Salant. He said, you think you're such a big tzaddik? I heard you don't even use the Erev? Such a frummy. But gonev nefesh b'Yisrael, but kidnapping a Jewish kid, that you're fine with. He went to another Rav and he says, I saw how you daven so beautifully, got a 25-minute Shemana Esrei. But you think I don't know what you're up to in this town? He went one by one and just completely ripped them to pieces. And then he left and he said to everyone else in the community who weren't decision makers, he said, from this point forward, it is prohibited to live in the shtetl of Salant. And then he ran away. He ran out of shul. Right? So he made a big commotion. After they realized what they did wrong, and they released the boy, and obviously they figured out what to do with Tsar Nicholas's gzeira, but that woman's boy was free, but he went berserk at them, and one of his students told Rav Yisroel Salanter that the community rabbis reneged on their kidnapping this boy, and he released his statement. He said, okay, fine, it's all right, you people could live in Salant, etc. There's another similar story. The only other story that we know of him getting angry, but we'll leave that for now. We talked about already how he formalized the Musar movement. Other idioms which made its way into really the defining ethos of the world of Musar is he would say that it's harder to change one characteristic, one midah, than to master all of Shas. That's what he would say. Mastering Shas is a crazy accomplishment, but changing one thing, you're stingy, to become generous, to become thankful when you're not someone who's naturally filled with gratitude. All those things, he says, without Musar it's impossible, and it takes constant work in order to change a person. There's another very famous line, which is a beautiful one. I'll tell you just the line and then the background where it came from. He says, Kol zman she'haner dolek, right? Od efshar letaken. You heard that one? As long as the candle is still burning, there's still work to do. So one time he noticed, this also shows a characteristic of Yisroel Salanter that's important to highlight. He was walking in the middle of the night, and he saw in a window there was a candle burning. So he was, again, it's one of the things when he noticed something, he pursued it. He was curious what was going on there. I'll tell you another story after this about it. But he went in, he saw where the candle was burning, and he saw a shoemaker hard at work. It was late at night. No one's still working at that time. And he asked the shoemaker, how much longer are you going to fix shoes for tonight? And the shoemaker replied that Kol zman she'haner dolek, od efshar letaken. As long as my candle's still burning, I could still fix it. So that was it was said in such a casual, non-holy way, but then he took that as like a motto for his Mussar movement, that as long as you're still here, you could say, oh, I'm 40 years old, 45 years old, and I'm still, this character. No. You could change. You put as long as the ner is doleg, you're alive and you're reflecting on yourself. You could still fix things. His sensitivity to other people was very iconic. There's a famous story that he was walking to shul the night of Yom Kippur for Kol Nidre, okay? And he heard in a house that he was passing, there was a baby crying. So he went into the house to see what was happening, and he saw, and this was the thing that drove him nuts sometimes. He saw that the mother had gone to shul because she was a big frummy. She wanted to be in shul, and she left the baby home with the 11-year-old daughter. And the 11-year-old daughter didn't really know what to do, and the baby woke up and was crying. So Salanter made the bottle and got the baby back to sleep. He was late for Kol Nidre at the time. Everyone was like, "Where's Yisroel? Where is he?" Right? But he wasn't there because he was helping this little baby. He was about to leave. And he saw that the 11-year-old was like a little scared to be left alone. So he stayed the whole night of Kol Nidre. Kol Nidre is what? Tefillah, D'Rabbanan. But helping another Yid, Chesed, that's a D'Oraisa. And the whole Kol Nidre night, he was helping this 11-year-old girl and the baby. Suffice to say, when the mother came home, she learned a life lesson to take with her for the rest of her life. One of his great discoveries was he really described a solid 40 years before Sigmund Freud, the concept of the subconscious, right? He was really the first person in history to really describe what this meant. He has a famous story, which again is so definitive in the Mussar world, because if you can understand the character that we're describing, there's outward actions and there's inside motivations of those actions. Sometimes we make a decision on the moment, so it's the subconscious that's talking. And the analogy that he gave is if you can imagine a big rabbi who had a son who was a little bit of a no-goodnik, okay, and he also had a student who was like this prized student, okay, so a son, it could be that he was describing a little bit his own life, because he had a son who went to university and became a very famous mathematician. His son, I looked up the details on Wikipedia today, I wasn't so familiar with it, but his son created something which is called invented in 1864, the Lipkin linkage, which is like some mathematical, it's like a picture, but it describes a planar method of converting exact straight line motions to circular motions without reference guidelines. And apparently this is something which is like mathematically important. Maybe Yisroel could explain to us after. But he went to yeshiva and became not religious. Okay, he went to university, became not religious. So maybe he was like speaking in his own experience. He had a prize student and a son who was well, in his analogy, no goodnik. So he referred to like this: who does the great rabbi love more? His son was a no goodnik, or the prize student? So he described something called like the ahava megula, the open love, and the ahava misuteret, the hidden love, right? Subconscious and conscious. And if you look at the rabbi on a day-to-day basis and the way he interacts with his son, you'll see maybe frustration or shortness or just not a lot of love. But when you see him with his students, he's always patting his student on the back. He's always making sure his student is well fed. He's always bragging about his student when he meets new friends. Oh, you should meet the student in my yeshiva. He's incredible. Never talks about his son. Let's say they're both sleeping in his home and there's a fire. Who does the rabbi go grab first if he only has time for one? His son. So there you see an intense moment, the subconscious coming forward, right? This is well before Sigmund Freud, not well before, about 40 odd years before it was described in any secular works. Another definitive moment is in 1848, there was a horrible cholera outbreak in Vilna. And he was the greatest rabbi of the time. There was actually pushback because it was a Bezdin in Vilna, and he didn't ask the Bezdin about this. But in Shul, he got up after Shachris, before Torah reading, he made Kiddush, he drank grape juice, and he had cakes and mazona set out, and he says it's a mitzvah to eat today on Yom Kippur. He was afraid that certain people would be weak, and because of the cholera, and fasting would make it more intense, and they wouldn't make it. So what he didn't do was say, if you're feeling weak, then go to the back, there's Kiddush for you. Because he knew that people who were feeling weak would also be frummies, and they wouldn't listen to it. So he himself broke his fast, and he ate and he drank on Yom Kippur after making Kiddush, and told everyone that this year we need to eat and drink on Yom Kippur. Right? The Bezdin was very upset at him, and he had an argument with the Bezdin. I'm not going to get into details, but classic to some things don't change. In other words, right? So he later on he had to leave Vilna and go back to Kovna because he was offered a very important political position, because he was very respected, so well spoken. He was a master of Russian and Germany and Yiddish, and he spoke languages beautifully. He was a majestic person, and he was offered a political position, and he didn't want to take it, but it was one of those offers that you can't really say no to. So once he said no, he had to run away, like many Jews in history, and that's when he went back from Kovna back to Germany. He started another yeshiva there. He started another huge innovation of his was the kollel, the first kollel in history, right? That you could learn Torah as a married person and get paid for it, get a stipend for it. Right? That was the Kovna kollel, and some of the greatest leaders of Europe studied in the Kovna kollel. That was his innovation. So he innovated feeding the Bachrim in yeshiva internally. He innovated the whole concept of the kollel, and he innovated the Musar movement, where many of his students continued in his ways and wrote more Musar master works about the Musar, and they're studied to yeshivas today. So he was someone who really was, like we mentioned at the beginning, a truly gifted person, a genius, a tremendously sensitive person, picked up on the subtleties of human character, applied that to himself, and really tried to spread that message to the world around him. One last story I'll share, because I just love this one so much, and I just can't talk about him without mentioning the story, is that they were eating a Shabbos meal, and he was washing his hands for challah. Two more stories. Washing his hands for challah, and he was only going up to his knuckles. And in halacha, that's okay. The Shulchan Aruch says that if you want to go extra scrupulous, what we call MRC, maximum religious compliance, go all the way to the wrist. But halachically, it's okay. So the students, this Rebbe, this doesn't fit with the rest of your life. You take all the chumras, and why are you being so lenient? And he says, look outside. It's so cold. And the moment we finish this barrel of water, she, the non-Jewish help, she's going to have to go outside to the well and refill it for us. I want this water to go as long as possible to prevent her from having to go. Today if we're all use a little bit of water, it'll go further, and she won't have to go outside in the cold and fill it up by the well. Another story about Friday night. That's why it triggered. He was traveling from city to city, as he did often, and he was being hosted Friday night. And the table was set, and it was time to say Kiddush, and the challah wasn't covered. So the husband lost it at his wife. He says, why can't you cover the challah? And just embarrassed her. So Rabbi Yisroel said, tell me something. They went on with the meal, and in the middle of the meal, he said, Rabbi Yisroel told this guy, when his wife wasn't around, he says, tell me something. Do you know why we cover the challah? And the guy says, of course, because usually we make the bracha on the bread first, right? If it was on a Monday, right? But on Shabbos, we have to do the Kiddush first, but usually bread comes before wine, and now we have to do wine before bread. So we don't want the challah to be embarrassed, so we cover it. And Rabbi Yisroel looked at him and says, if we have to be so careful to not embarrass an inanimate object, right? You think maybe you shouldn't embarrass your wife, right? Right? So he really gave it to him. But that's really, we know that challah doesn't have feelings. But all these things he saw that we have to learn from halacha the way to act to other people, and seeing someone embarrass someone because the challah wasn't uncovered, it just made no sense to him. The reason why we do all those things is to become more refined and special people. And when he saw people so from on the outside, and just not friendly, not good people on the inside. They're like, doing all the trees, but they're missing the forest. That's really what he saw. And he diagnosed that that's why the Haskalah movement was so successful at taking Jews away from Judaism, because there was no passion inside of Judaism. So he believed that the Musar movement, that using Torah to become a more refined person, when you see the value that Torah really could do that to people, he saw that Jews would become passionate again in Torah, and therefore he spent his entire life promoting the Musar movement with a lot of backlash from the Lithuanian Rashi Yeshivas. They hated the idea at the beginning, but he was such a giant, he was such a personality, such a Torah giant, such a charismatic person, that he was able to really inculcate a new ingredient in the Torah Yeshiva ethos, which has survived ad hayom hazeh until today.
Why did they hate it?
Not primed to loving new ideas. It was emotional, like we just like halacha. Is it kosher? Is it treif? What's the question of Tosfos? What's the answer of Tosfos? How does Tosfos' question make you feel? It wasn't the yeshiva's cup of tea. So it took a long time, and it took a Torah giant like. Keep in mind that in that generation, the only people who spoke about inspiration and feelings and characteristics was the Maggid. The Maggid was like the Maggid. He was a schlepper, right? But all the big Rabbanim, you wouldn't catch them dead talking about inspiration or passion or feelings or midos. They were talking about halacha. So it was very countercultural at that time to have such a Torah giant speaking about these ideas as central importance. Yeah.
You taught me something new. I didn't realize this was a counter to the Haskalah movement. I really thought it was a counter to the Hasidic movement.
So it's interesting because he wrote that he never, he writes in one of these letters that he never, he wasn't arguing with Hasidus, he was trying to enhance Hasidus. Like Hasidus is esoteric, and he wanted to make it about us, like about the person. So he wanted to take the mysticism. He didn't really delve into so much from the mysticism because it led people to think too big picture, too mystical. He wanted like the Gemara to speak to you, and he wanted you to learn Gemara and say like, wow, what I said to that person wasn't so sensitive, right? And he felt that Hasidus needs to be brought down. He did say that he ended up departing from Hasidus, but at the beginning, his original motivation in the Musar movement was to make Musar usable. But then he realized that it was something else. Yeah.
Was there a point in time where someone came along later that morphed it into what might have then landed in the yeshivas and lasted until today? This is not exactly how he did it originally.
Right.
Was there some point in time that shift that planted it as we see it now, or is that just developed over time and just
right? I would say in one way his vision of the Musar movement was very successful, and in another way it was a colossal failure. It was a colossal failure because if he would visit a yeshiva now, he wouldn't say, "Oh, this is what I was realizing, right? This is what I was picturing." It was a huge success because he inspired incredible students to write incredible works and give the yeshiva world the sensitivity towards midos that it has today, but it's not to the same degree as him. There's no en masse group of people that are learning Musar like he learned Musar. But the fact that we're talking about character refinement, the fact that there was a sefer written about Lashon Hara by the Chofetz Chaim, like I don't think that would have happened without Rav Yisroel Salanter, right? To go back to your question, Martin, before Rav Yisroel Salanter, like Rav Zundel of Salant, his Rebbe, so his grand Rebbe's was Rav Chaim Volozhin. Right. So Rav Chaim Volozhin's key goal in all his mystical writings was to show the world of Chassidus that we have depth too. Right. But it still wasn't focused on the character. It was more focused on esoteric Kabbalistic thinking and instilling meaning in what we do from those big picture ideas. But his focus was about character refinement through the lens of Torah. Yes.
Do we know if he had any success in pulling people away from Haskalah back to Torah Judaism? Are there any examples of people who? I
can't think of specific examples. There were two famous students of his who he wanted to show how powerful the Musar movement was. So he sent them to yeshiva because he wanted them to be an example of like what a person of the world could be with the Musar movement. and they both went off the derech. So that wasn't a good experiment. Happened to one of his children, as I mentioned. I don't have any specific examples, but I believe the examples are the people that had latched onto the Musar movement. All his students, they were all potential victims of the Haskalah movement, to move to the bigger cities and be exposed to these big ideas, which he was theoretically okay with, but he felt that the ideas within Judaism could compete and satiate that intellectual curiosity and passion towards ideas. But if you send a kid to university and they're exposed to these professors that have brilliant ideas, and compared to the dull Yiddishkeit they were brought up with in the shtetl, that was a very dangerous contrast. So that's really what he felt was the important motivation towards the Muslim movement. Now, I'm not trying to be intellectually dishonest. Especially later in his life, he was vehemently against any secular education, because I think what he saw with his students and with his own son. But theoretically, really the war wasn't against secular education. The war was against the dull nature of the way Yiddishkeit was being communicated, that you were either going to be a great Torah scholar in halacha, or the only other Jewish leader you could think of is the Maggid, who was like a schlepper who was meant to inspire you. But it was like a joke. It was really Jewish entertainment with the tonality of Torah, right? And he was trying to change that you could talk about midos, you could talk about character with a very high level intellectual expectation and vigor. Okay? Awesome. So back in 2 weeks, for the very last segment, very important one also, Rav Shner Zabed of Liadi. Nashikova.
Thank you.